In this episode, I'll be adding an awning to the north side of my workshop. There's a walkway on this side of the building between the wall and the cedar hedges, and this would be perfect for some outdoor covered space. I was looking to have an awning that is wall-mounted and would not require any posts to support it. It would need to be strong and lightweight with enough head clearance and a similar slope to other buildings here, and would allow me to keep the rainwater pipe already on that wall. After a few variations, I settled on this design. The metal roof would be 48 inches with a slope down off horizontal of 20 degrees. A 2x4 on the flat would be screwed to the studs behind the sheathing, and the rafter and brace 2x4s would be vertically oriented. For symmetry with the rafter, the brace 2x4 would be on a 20-degree downslope. I decided to edit this video in a more tutorial style, with more specifics on the design, cutting, and assembly of the awning brackets. And I'm doing that as I think there might be a few of you out there that are looking for an easy-to-make awning of your own. And I also was trying to design the brace so you could cut the pieces efficiently from a standard 8-foot board. To make the 6 awning braces I needed, I was able to cut the parts from 7 2x4s. Parts A and C I could cut 3 per 2x4 length, and for part B I could get 2 from a length, and this left the least amount of waste. After selecting the best 2x4s I could find, and paying a ridiculous price for them, I set up my miter saw in the shop to cut all the parts. I'll first cut part B, the rafter component of the awning brace, and I can get 2 of these from an 8-foot 2x4. Both ends will have a 20-degree cut. As I like to do, I made a drawing of the SketchUp model to reference the dimensions. If this is something that you would like to build, then I'll have a free drawing on my website that you can download. Go to manabouttools.com/awning or see the link in the description below. I was looking for a balance between strength and weight, and of course cost, and to satisfy these requirements, I decided to use standard framing lumber for these braces. And if cost was not as much of a concern, then using cedar would also be good, as it's strong enough but lighter. And I'll also save a lot of weight by using corrugated sheet steel for the roof. The laser sight on my miter saw can be hard to see, so I often just sight down the blade to line up my angled cuts like these. Marking a pencil line at this precise angle would also work here, and an adjustable angle gauge would be great for drawing that. Then I can cut 3 part C pieces from an 8-foot length. And each of these has a 20-degree cut on one end and a 50-degree on the other. And lastly, I'll cut the part A pieces. They have a 20-degree bevel on both ends. And I can cut 3 of these from a 2x4. I'll take the piece that attaches to the wall, part A, and drill 3 pilot holes on my drill press. And I used a 3/16 bit for that. Each brace will be held in place with 3 5/16 by 4-inch GRK screws. These are a structural washer head screw that's much like a galvanized lag bolt, but they're stronger and much higher quality. I screwed some scrap 2x4s to my bench to make a jig. I cut a piece of plywood at 50 degrees to line up the walls of the jig. This way my angles will be consistent, and I can hold all the pieces of the brace during assembly. And I'll lift 2 of the pieces, B and C, using these 1-inch thick plywood angle brackets. They happen to be the right thickness I need to center these pieces that are lying on their flat side to part A, which is sitting up on its edge. It's possible to assemble these braces without this improvised jig on my bench, but I was looking to create 6 identical units, and I was thinking that if I started this way, being as accurate as possible, then the chances of them all being identical was pretty good. And once up on the wall, it would be very easy to spot any that weren't. I'll make some pencil marks on part B where it meets part C, and those marks will help me with alignment in my pocket hole jig. Now, there's many ways to attach these two parts. Some people like pocket hole screws and some don't, but I think this is a good place to use them given the 3.5-inch thickness of the 2x4s. I'll be using 2.5-inch pocket screws, 2 on one side and 1 on the other. Now, on the back side of part A that attaches to the wall, I'll mark a center line where it meets B and C. And I can then eyeball the screw locations and drill 2 1/8-inch pilot holes, going through A and into B, then through the lower end of A and into C. And I'll apply some glue to the end of part B, then run in the screws. I'll next apply glue to both ends of part C, then hold it in place while I run in 2 GRK screws. This is where the jig and clamps come in handy. They maintain the critical angle made up between A and B while C is being added. Also, I'll drill a pilot hole near the sharp end of C and into B. And I'll run in a screw there and into the 2 pockets drilled in part B earlier. I'll flip the brace over and run in the single pocket screw on the other side. Now, I'm not too concerned about the holes made by the pocket hole drill bit, and I can easily fill them in later with some exterior caulking. And that brace is done, and I'll repeat all those steps on the remaining parts. With the glue at the joints dry, I'll apply a coat of primer, first with a brush into the corners, and then with a roller on all the flat surfaces. I also added an extra coat to the cut ends. And the next day I applied 2 coats of semi-gloss enamel paint, again with brush and then roller. I also primed and painted the 1x4 strapping that the roof screws will be driven into, and you'll see those later after the braces go up on the wall. On this north wall, I have a 3-inch pipe that connects the rain gutters on the east and west side of both this shop and another outbuilding. And this plumbing setup runs into the 1,000-gallon tank at the far corner. I'll need to remove this pipe for the awning installation and then put it back after. I'll add 2 temporary supports to help with this. They will support the pipe while I remove the existing metal brackets and standoff blocks, and also later when I put the pipe back in place. I'll put a link to the playlist for the series of rainwater harvesting videos I did a few years ago. I go into a lot of detail on the installation of this tank and all the plumbing and parts I used. Now I can remove the screws and the metal pipe brackets. I used rubber couplings with screw clamps on each end of this long run, and I'll loosen those now. And slide the couplings off each end so I can get that pipe right out of the way now. And that went pretty well, and I was glad I used rubber couples. And this rubber seems to be holding up well. On the north side it doesn't see a lot of sun, so I'm hoping it doesn't degrade very quickly. And I'll be removing the small 2x2 standoff blocks that the metal U-brackets were attached to. And I have a drawing for the layout and location of the brackets. Now I'll add a mark on the wall where the bottom of the awning braces will land. And at this point I attach a straight 2x4 and check that it's level. Then add a small block to support the end of the next 2x4. The nail heads from the 4x8 siding panels are visible on this wall, so it's easy for me to find the center of each stud inside the wall. Here I'll make a mark over from the center, half the width of part A, which is 1 3/4 inches, and I'll mark a few points vertically or plumb above that. And then I'll place my first awning bracket on that line and drill through the pilot hole into the wall and into the stud behind the siding. Then I'll run in a screw with the impact driver. And I'll check that bracket didn't move and it's still plumb, and drill the pilot holes and run in the other 2 screws. As I drilled the pilot holes through part A on the drill press earlier, I know they are at right angles to the wall face, and then my screws will go straight into the center of the studs. And I just repeated this for the rest of the brackets. And as I was going along, I thought that the middle screw location could have been about 1 inch higher. It was a bit tight to get my drill then driver in with part C in the way, but I had just enough room. And that was just by luck, as I didn't specifically check those clearances ahead of time. I just eyeballed it. I gotta say, I really like those GRK screws. They come at a premium, but they're really nice to work with. Even though I often drill pilot holes, you really don't need to most of the time with these screws. And that's the last bracket going up. And I didn't run into any issues, so that was good. My only concern at this point was fitting the pipe back into place, and I was hoping that I had enough clearance to keep it sloped as it was before. So I slowly threaded the pipe through the eyes of the awning braces, trying to get the pipe to rest on my temporary blocks. And this was another one of those times where it was worth the effort to plan ahead. With such a long pipe, I felt I would need to give my future self a hand. And I was able to get it all lined up to where it was before, slip the rubber couples over the joints, then tighten the screw clamps, so that was a relief. Part A provides the same standoff distance as the 2x2 blocks I used earlier, so I could attach the U-brackets right to them. With all the metal pipe brackets on, I removed the 2 temporary support blocks. Then I can remove my level 2x4s from the wall. And since it's kind of fun to watch, here's a time lapse of the day up to this point. And it also shows an angle from the far end where the rainwater tank sits. On the wall I have 3 electrical boxes. The one on the left will be for the rainwater tank pump. The middle box is a service disconnect for a heat pump, and the one on the right is a 30 amp outlet for an RV or for electric car charging. Videos on some of that coming up soon. Before I can start installing the 1x4 slats across the awning brackets, I need to check for square corner to corner. I cut 2 pieces of plywood and attached them across the 2 endmost braces. This allowed me to square the ends to the wall. With it as square as I could get, I began screwing the roof strapping on. I had a stack of these 1x4s that I was using as temporary post braces from a previous project. They are only 8 feet long strips, so I had to put these up in more pieces than I wanted to, but it's what I had, so I have to work with it. With the price of lumber, I wanted to use what I already had on hand. Also, the 1x4s will do the job, and they will not add much additional weight. So it was a lot of up and down the ladder and squeezing in between the strapping and braces to screw all these boards on. And when I had a few rows of strapping on, I could remove the plywood that was holding the end braces square. I had my roofing supplier cut the corrugated sheets to 48 inches in length. I worked out the overall length of the strapping so I wouldn't need to rip any of the roofing sheets down, at least according to my calculations. As you go along, things can vary when you're overlapping the edges. With the first panel, it's important to get it positioned square and lined up with the roof strapping as best possible. My wall had some bows to it at this end, so I was also trying to find the best fit line where the panel touches the wall. Later, I can fill any gaps in that upper edge with flashing. Looking back at it now, I could have snapped a chalk line for that best fit reference. I'm not a roofer, so I just do the best I can. I mark my roofing screw locations with a Sharpie before I haul up a sheet. Then I know that the screw will find the strapping below it. I used a 3/4 inch rubber gasket with metal washer roofing screw to install these panels. It was tight working in that little space I had beside the cedar hedges. Just not a lot of room for positioning the ladders or myself. But it was all coming together and I could see the finish line. And luckily the last sheet fell into place without having to trim the sheet or the strapping. And it also looked like the end flashing I had left over from the shed extension would fit as well. Small victories. Let me know what you think of this awning by leaving a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.